Good day, ladies and gents. Today we have Metro Alan Stein. Thank you for coming today. It's actually a show I'm super excited about. It's a very timely subject. This is something maybe been going on for many, many years, specifically in your practice, but also nowadays, once you say it's true, Poseidon, that it seems like a lot of people in the world gone crazy or mad, and it feels like they're under the influence of some force or drugs or both. According to Metro Alan Stein, there may be a reason for it, and a very legitimate one. And it's not just according to him. It's been exposed both by U.S. and Canadian authorities, revealed in the hearings in U.S. from the 60s onwards. What I'm talking about is MKUltra. Poseidon, what do you know about MKUltra?
Well, I know that it's a program, and whoever runs the program, basically they have, you could say they have like an institute of higher learning, I would call it, where the gifted go. Some would call it a mansion.
That was part of it, I believe. I think it was a combination of all programs. I think it started with a program called Bluebird, and you can correct me, Alan Stein, if I'm wrong on this one, but I think it started in '49 with Bluebird that evolved into Artichoke, and then it's called what we know now MKUltra. And basically the point of this program is to figure out how to control people, how to control their behavior without their knowledge, by the use of some kind of hypnotic tools as well as drugs like LSD and some other stuff. How did you get involved with it? I know you've been involved with it for a long, long time.
Yes, I've been involved in it since the beginning of my practice when I was admitted to the bar of Quebec, which was in 1963. At the time, after being admitted to the bar of Quebec, I joined the office of Stein & Stein, which was my late father, who was a very successful and renowned litigation lawyer, and my uncle, who did real estate law. And my father had been engaged at the time by Louis Weinstein, who was a candidate and a former patient of Dr. Ewen Cameron. And I don't know if you're aware, but Dr. Ewen Cameron was the one who created this MKUltra experimentation, subjecting many of his patients who were depressed, particularly women who were under the after giving birth were seriously depressed as a result of giving birth to a child and going through the period of pregnancy, and it was referred to as postpartum depression that many women experienced. And Dr. Cameron created this MKUltra experimentation where he was subjecting his patients who were depressed and who were suffering from mental illness to massive electric shock treatments, experimental drugs, as you've referred to, and what was referred to by Dr. Cameron as psychic driving, whereby he would put the patient in a room all alone and put earphones on them like the ones that you're wearing and record the same type of recording over and over again. And the purpose of all this MKUltra experimentation was to wipe out parts of their memory which he considered to have caused their depression and mental illness. But Dr. Cameron, unfortunately, never obtained the informed consent of these patients, and his experimentation and MKUltra experimentation eventually was never accepted by the Association of Psychiatrists and so on in Canada and the United States. But at the time that Dr. Cameron experimented with these patients, these experiments were funded by the Canadian government because he was head of the Allan Memorial Institute, where he was the director of the Allan Memorial Institute from 1950 to 1965, and by the CIA of the United States, the Central Intelligence Agency. And these experiments were funded by both the CIA and the Canadian government.
So is Allan Memorial a McGill institution?
It's a hospital, a part of the Royal Victoria Hospital. It was part of the Royal Victoria Hospital, and it still exists.
But Royal Victoria was part of the McGill network.
Yes, yes. And I don't know if you know, Louis Weinstein and other former patients of Dr. Cameron engaged the office of Stein, of which I became associated, to institute proceedings and make claims upon the Allan Memorial Institute and the Royal Victoria Hospital and the estate of Dr. Cameron and the CIA for the damages they sustained as a result of these experiments for which Dr. Cameron and the hospitals never obtained informed consent.
So in the layman terms, you sued them.
We sued them. Our office sued them. And not only did we sue the Royal Victoria Hospital and the Allan Memorial, but we sued as well. But we also acted together with lawyers in Washington in actions representing 9 of the former patients of Dr. Cameron in their proceedings against the CIA. And these proceedings were taken around the same time as the proceedings that were instituted here in Quebec against the Allan Memorial Hospital and the Royal Victoria Hospital. And on the eve of the trial against the CIA in the United States, and they were these patients, 9 patients, were including our client Louis Weinstein. These actions were settled by the CIA on the eve of the trial. They settled with all the 9 former patients and victims of Dr. Cameron who were subject to the MKUltra experimentation.
Poseidon, you wouldn't believe, right? So my phone's on silent, like it turned off. I'm a professional. I'm in the professional mode. We start talking about MKUltra and CIA. My phone start beeping. Brings me to another question. Why are you still alive? How come CIA did not take care of you as a collateral damage in the case? What year was that? When did you sue them?
We sued them well, we didn't sue the CIA. It was lawyers, 2 lawyers from Washington, one who's since deceased and the other who's retired. The one who settled the case eventually was, the firm was called Rowe, R-A-U, and Turner. And Turner was the one who is still alive, who settled the case on the eve of the trial for the 9 former patients of Dr. Cameron, including our client, Louis Weinstein, and including another one of my clients, Janine Huard.
So what year was that?
That would be in the, I'd say the case was finally settled in the late 80s or early 90s.
But originally you sued them. How long did it take to get to the settlement?
It took many, many years.
Many years. So what does settlement actually means? Can you explain to our listeners, like, because a settlement really is...
compensation for the damages they sustained, which the CIA, even though they didn't admit their liability, they settled out of court to buy their peace and not get involved in a lengthy court hearing where Rowe and Turner were representing 9 of the former patients of Dr. Cameron, including our client Louis Weinstein, and including another client of mine, Janine Huard.
So a settlement, do you think they settled just because they did not want to be exposed more than they already were during the proceedings, meaning like
it could
discovery trial? So
yeah.
If the settlement itself doesn't mean they admitted to existence of MKUltra in that particular case, or they just didn't want to admit to any doing or any involvement in Dr. Cameron's?
Well, they couldn't deny that they were involved in Dr. Cameron's treatment and his application of MKUltra experimentation, because they funded this for Dr. Cameron. They paid Dr. Cameron for carrying out these experiments. So they couldn't deny that they were involved in funding the MKUltra experimentation by Dr. Cameron. But they wouldn't. They bought their piece and settled with all these 9 victims, former patients of Dr. Cameron, to buy their piece so there would be no further exposure against them.
Was the funding discovered as a result of the proceedings, or is it just information came out through
No, the
hearings?
funding was discovered as a result of the proceedings.
Can you tell a little bit more about exactly how all the tests that Dr. Cameron did and all the experimentations and tortures, I would rather call it tortures, mental and physical ones, what did it amount to? Like, how did people suffer? Like, how did it affect their life and the life of the
Well, many of them who were treated by Dr. Cameron committed suicide. Others returned home and they were virtually vegetables. And they, even though their memory was wiped out, they continued to suffer from mental illness, and that is why I'm presently involved in litigation against not against the CIA. I chose not to sue the CIA, but against the Allan Memorial and Royal Victoria Hospital, and I'm representing the families now of the former patients of Dr. Cameron who were experimented upon. And these proceedings are pending before the Superior Court now in Montreal, where I've sued. You can refer to the case. It's under Superior Court number 500-17-106683-199 of the Superior Court, and you'll look at the.
And we'll list that. You'll
look at the proceedings, which will show you the application is referred to as plaintiff's modified originating application, and we filed exhibits P1 to P68 in support of this application, and it's under 91 of the Code of Civil Procedure, whereby Alison Steele and Marilyn Rappaport, who are not patients of Dr. Cameron, but who are asking for damages, because in the case of Alison Steele, her mother was a former patient of Dr. Cameron. In the case of Marilyn, who is since deceased, and the case of Marilyn Rappaport, her sister was a former patient of Dr. Cameron, and she is still alive, and Marilyn Rappaport is a curator to her sister. So since the sister has been treated at the Royal Victoria Hospital and at the Allan Memorial Hospital, she is under curatorship because she requires protective supervision under our courts, and she never recovered from the MKUltra experimentation upon her. And it's referred to as a modified originating application. And here it's tantamount to a class action, because Alison Steele and Marilyn Rappaport are not only suing for themselves, but they're acting on behalf of mandators, other families whom they can act for to mitigate the cost of litigation and so on.
So it's a class action.
So it's not referred to as a class action. It's referred to as a direct action, whereby they are representing the mandators and themselves personally. But the mandators are not plaintiffs in the present action. They've mandated Alison Steele and Marilyn Rappaport to represent them in this action. And we've been subject to, the action was taken I believe it was taken in 2019, okay.
So it's been going on for 3 years.
It's been going on for 3 years, and it's been modified. The original application, I believe, was taken in 2019 or the fall of 2018. And the government and the Attorney General of Canada have taken all kinds of proceedings to dismissed the action. They took a motion, an exception to dismiss, saying that this is a type of action where they should not be representing other families. They should only be representing themselves. So they took an action to dismiss and cross out the other mandators who form part of the action and whom we've alleged in the present action. And it was dismissed by the trial judge, their motion. He said that the action is perfectly well-founded and so on. They went to appeal from the judgment of the trial judge, who was seized with the case management of this case. The judge was Andre Prevost. They went to appeal, asked the Court of Appeal to grant leave to hear the appeal, and the Court of Appeal, a judge of the Court of Appeal, refused their motion and dismissed their motion. So now we're proceeding to the examination of Alison Jean Steele and Marilyn Rappaport. It's an examination on discovery by the lawyers for the Royal Victoria Hospital and the Attorney General of Canada and the McGill University Health Centre, which the Allan Memorial forms part of. And that will be taking place within the next few months. And there'll be a lengthy examination of both plaintiffs.
So you sued. It's sort of like in comedy we call it a callback. Your original lawsuit originated when Trudeau, the father, was the lead of the government, right, the head of the government.
It originated in the 60s, okay? And then what happened, unfortunately, was that one of the cases went to the Court of Appeal where I represented Gail Kastner, who was one of the former patients of Dr. Cameron, who was also subject to the experimentation MKUltra. And the Superior Court judge and the Court of Appeal dismissed the proceedings on the basis that Dr. Cameron, even though he was a doctor and director of the Allan Memorial, acted independently, and therefore you could not hold the Allan Memorial responsible or the Royal Victoria Hospital for any fault caused by him. Okay?
Judge did it. Judge said that. Judge decided that.
Judge and the Court of Appeal. So all the former victims had no recourse, okay, to proceed against the Attorney General of Canada, the Royal Victoria Hospital, and the Allan Memorial. So in the 90s, because of so many claims that were made by former patients of Dr. Cameron, when Brian Mulroney was Prime Minister of Canada, he appointed George Cooper to do a report in regard to the period where Dr. Cameron acted as director for the Allan Memorial, and this was referred to the dark period of the history of Canada from 1950 to 65, and to determine that whether or not, in the light of the funding by the Canadian government of these MKUltra experimentation, was the government responsible. And he mandated George Cooper, who was a member of the Conservative government at the time, and Brian Mulroney was Prime Minister and his government was Conservative. He replaced the Liberal government, okay. And George Cooper came out with a lengthy report saying that even though he found no responsibility on part of the Canadian government in funding these experimentation, there was a moral obligation of the government to compensate these former patients of Dr. Cameron who were subject to MKUltra. And so the Mulroney government, with Kim Campbell, who was the Minister of Justice at the time, came out with a offer, what was referred to as an ex gratia payment plan to compensate all these former patients of Dr. Cameron on the basis of the moral responsibility of Dr. Cameron, not the legal responsibility of Dr. Cameron, for the sum of $100,000 for each patient, subject to the proof that they had to make before a committee appointed by the government and before the Blue Cross based upon their medical records that they were subject to de-patterning. Now, de-patterning was referred to as the procedure whereby Dr. Cameron, in inflicting and subjecting these former patients of his, upon whom he subject them to MKUltra experimentation, their memories were erased, and that was referred, and they were put in an infantile stage, and they had to prove that based upon their medical records that their memory was erased and that they were put into an infantile stage, and if they could prove that, they were entitled to compensation. Hundreds of applications as a result of this ex gratia payment plan. I'll give you the exact.
Did you get your $100,000?
Many of them applied.
Sorry?
Alan, so hold on. Did you get your $100,000? Did you hear what he said? You can claim $100,000, man.
Really?
Yeah, because you can, if you prove you were subject to.
But you had to do it within a specific period, and that ex gratia payment plan was restrictively interpreted by the government. Hundreds of former patients of Dr. Cameron applied for compensation, and the government only allowed about 79, granted 79 applications.
How many people total were experimented on?
Hundreds experimented upon, and that's where I became involved again.
Hundreds, hundreds under the 1,000 or 100 over 1,000?
No, hundreds under the thousands.
Under the 1,000. Okay.
So I became involved because one of my clients, Gail Kastner, she applied for, even though she lost her civil suit before a Superior Court judge in the Superior Court of Montreal, and lost on the merits before the Court of Appeal. She still applied for the compensation, and she was denied compensation, saying that she had not established she was de-patterned. So I went to the federal court, and I was successful in obtaining a judgment by a federal court judge saying that the government misapplied and misinterpreted the order in council of the conservative government and the ex gratia payment plan. They should have had interpreted it in a much more liberal manner and should have allowed many of the applications that were not allowed by the government, including the Gail Kastner application, and the government had to pay Gail Kastner the $100,000 which I collected for her.
Can I comment on this? Yeah, this is clear. My question is, so it seems like not seems, but from what you're saying from the proceedings, it's been proven that foreign intelligence, even though it's south of the border, they're kind of neighbors, right? Friends, but CIA comes in here and does experiments on Canadian citizens. So based on the case, which is saying the proceedings, Canadian government did not know it was going on. Either it denies it or it's not proven to be liable for its actions of CIA. But which is worse, the fact that they allowed that to happen or they didn't know it was happening?
Well, that's another issue, but that hasn't been decided by a court, whether they knew what was happening, whereby the CIA funded these experiments. But
in your opinion...
But the government of Canada funded these experiments as well. Dr. Cameron received funding from the government of Canada for these experiments. So that's why Mulroney's government, the Conservative government in the 90s, offered to all the former patients of Dr. Cameron, upon proof that they were de-patterned, compensation of $100,000 without admitting their liability, but by taking the position that the government had a moral responsibility because they funded these experiments, and therefore that's why the Mulroney government offered this ex gratia payment plan. Okay. But as I said, the government also took a position that to restrictively interpret as to who would be eligible for this compensation of $100,000. But I was successful in winning the case for Gail Kastner, and the government had to compensate her. And then I received another client who engaged me Janine Huard, who was compensated by the CIA, and notwithstanding, she was one of the parties who sued the CIA, and notwithstanding same, the government of Canada did not, the committee set up, did not grant her compensation for the $100,000. So I went to court again before a federal court judge, and I was successful in winning her case, whereby the federal court took the position, and there the government of Canada took the position we were too late. We should have sued the government of Canada before the federal court within a delay of 1 year. The judge held that no, 1 year is exceptional. 1 year is very exceptional, and there are circumstances where the 1 year prescriptive period could be extended. And the judge held that in these type of cases, there's no the 1 year prescriptive period should not apply. Okay, so Janine Huard was eventually compensated as well. And then subsequent thereto, I received compensation for many other former patients of Dr. Cameron, including the late mother of Alison Jean Steele. I sued for her, and the government of Canada then settled her case.
So what you're telling me, it's basically all those proceedings that do prove the fact that Canadian government was involved in testing, in medical testing, psychological and physical torture of patients without their knowledge. It's a fact.
That's a fact, in my opinion.
It's also a fact that CIA did it. It's also the fact that institutions like hospitals in McGill, all those institutions that we meant to put trust in. That's what we've been told on TV. Even, let's take the last 2 years. We've been told by talking heads on TV, how we need to trust the doctors, how we need to trust the government, because they know and they're here to do it. This is the right thing to do. But we have a history of a government. Do you know, does that ever came out at any proceedings? Like which direction did those programs took after testing? Like, were they implemented anywhere else under different circumstances?
Well, I've received calls as a result of the publicity I obtained from CBC and from other reporters and so on, and newspapers, as a result of the present case that I'm involved in, the Alison Jean Steele case and the Marilyn Rappaport case against the Attorney General of Canada, Royal Victoria Hospital, McGill University Health Centre. I've received many calls from many Americans and other Canadians who claim that they recently have been subject to MKUltra experimentation, and they want to get my opinion as to whether or not they have a right of action against the hospitals or other institutions where they were treated and experimented upon by inflicting upon them the MKUltra experimentation.
So be careful of the government, basically what we're saying. They don't really have your best interest in mind. Whose interest do they have? Well,
I'm not going to conclude.
Yeah, I know you cannot. As a lawyer, you can. That's where I'm going. This is Alex Saz Show. So I'm going to travel with this idea farther. And I don't know. Did you have to look into the things like other cases with, say, like Marilyn Manson or Midnight Climax cases? Or you strictly focused on this?
No.
But what's interesting, what you mentioned was the people that were experimented on, they experienced some kind of trauma. In your case, the pregnancy, what is it called? The postpartum depression, right?
That's right.
So when people experience some kind of psychological trauma, right, the brain nervous system does wonderful thing called compartmentalization, right? So it sort of compartmentalizes the way we basically hide things. And a lot of people develop multiple personality disorders. It's probably part of your study and part of your cases that you can confirm or concur. But from my understanding, this is what MKUltra took advantage of. They took advantage of those people who had a particular nervous system based on the trauma, the way the brain functioned, and then wanted to see how they can manipulate that brain farther. apparently, and I don't know if you ever seen the movie Sybil. It was also based on the true story about a multiple personality disorder. But basically, what happens, and it's kind of straight up goes to MKUltra, people that experience multiple personality disorder, sometimes they don't remember anything that happened prior, like some kind of event happens, like Poseidon, right? Like sometimes you'll say something and then next moment, no, I don't remember saying that, right? But because not because you forgot. And the interesting part is
That's just I'm an individual who talks a lot of shit, so most of the stuff I say are bullshit. So that's why I forget about.
That's what happens. But interesting is those people kind of become super strong because, let's say, one of my personalities went out and worked in the garden, and then I came home and I was like, I need to go train at the gym. But that personality does not remember that I just worked in the garden all day. And so some superhuman strength and also not awareness, but a rate of absorption of information, like a lot of people that do go through this kind of trauma, you can see they have wide open eyes. You can see a lot of white in the eyes. And again, this is not my words. This is based on MKUltra research and what they did. And when they took those people oftentimes from houses with kids that experienced the childhood trauma, young childhood abuse, sexual abuse, pedophilia. And those kids compartmentalized their brain to a point where it could be dealt with and programmed. And like things like maturing candidate came out of MKUltra, where you could go and commit an act and don't remember it the next day. In your experience, when you dealt with this, were any specific cases discussed in terms of like, would the any implementation of the program with any of the patients any of your clients that you dealt with? Like, did they think they were used by CIA in any ways, or were they strictly test subjects?
No, they were strictly test subjects. That's what they told me.
So you never actually.
Yeah. But in the case of Louis Weinstein, it had an impact on him for the rest of his life. There's no question about it. And what's interesting is his son, Harvey Weinstein, became. He's retired now. Became a renowned psychiatrist in the United States. And
nothing to do with Harvey Weinstein, the producer.
No, he's not related to Harvey Weinstein. He's a psychiatrist, and he assisted the lawyers in Washington because his father was involved in helping them to obtain settlement from the CIA when he was a psychiatrist teaching at I believe at Stanford University in California, and he assisted them. Because he went through this with his father. He saw how his father came back after being subject to MKUltra experimentation and treatment by Dr. Cameron, and what he was like as a father as he was growing up for the rest of his life. And here was a psychiatrist who was giving his opinion. This is what happened to my father, and he never was the same person after he came back and was treated by Dr. Cameron at the Allan Memorial.
So he had a clinical input, not just a personal, emotional input. He had a clinical input.
That's right.
But is there any evidence of any particular drugs involved, like LSD?
Yes, there's evidence of the drugs. The medical records of many of these former patients of Dr. Cameron show that drugs were involved. LSD and other drugs. Amitol, I think there's Amitol, I forget the second name of the drug. That was a drug that's commonly used upon many of these former patients of Dr. Cameron.
Is there anywhere in the case?
Amitol.
Amitol. Is there any evidence in the proceedings, like in discovery, that came out? Like, what was the purpose of all this? Like, did they use like if you research something, there's got to be a goal of research.
Right? Well, the purpose was to see if they could cure these people who who were suffering from severe depression. And Dr. Cameron was of the opinion that he found the answer and the remedy for these people, and that was the MKUltra experimentation. Drugs, extensive experimental drugs to be inflicted upon them, massive electroshock treatments, and the psychic driving. But all this is recorded and reflected in the proceedings that I've taken and the present proceedings that are pending before the Superior Court. And you should read the proceedings and refer to it and look at the exhibits. That can be easily sent to you if you need to look at the exhibits. And where I'm representing now the families of the former patients of Dr. Cameron.
See
Alison Steele and Marilyn Rappaport now are not only representing themselves, but they're representing over 60 families as well, whose either former father or mother or brother or sister were subject to the MKUltra treatments and experimentation.
See, where I see problem with this whole case right now, specifically Dr. Cameron, what you mentioned is, it was sort of coming from the good intention, right? That's what you just said. Well, he wanted to see if he can help people with depression, with compartmentalism. That's his claim. That's not part of the discovery. And he never admitted that there was a bigger reason, like for all the experimentations, to see how the behavior could be altered in general, maybe for malicious intent as well.
No.
That he never said it. However, we do know now that MKUltra had that in mind. And like primary example now, we know things like Manchurian Candidate programs, Midnight Climax. Midnight Climax, this is interesting. They in the 60s, I believe, or 70s, in San Francisco, I believe, in brothels, Johnnies, right, would come into the brothel house. The lady of the evening, the prostitute, would leave the room and would aerosol spray, like drugs like LSD, into the room, have the client observe it without their knowledge, and to see how they would react, what was their behavior. That was also a proven CIA project to it. Now it came out. And it was part of the congressional hearing, Rockefeller hearing, I believe. Even Ted Kennedy was part of those hearings originally. Church hearings, I don't know if you heard of that in your proceedings. That was the in United States. And a lot of that stuff came out. It was roughly about 150 programs that were discovered. Charles Manson was part of that program. He was handled by like Dr. Cameron equivalent in United States. I believe his name was Smith. Maybe not. Maybe I'm wrong. But one of the Dr. Smiths, Roger Smith, Roger Smith. He was supervising Marilyn Manson. He was also part of the MKUltra. So and again, you don't need to agree with me because I know you deal with litigation, deal with factual data that you can pinpoint and hold people accountable to. But to me, it's lots of evidence that government, CIA, and whoever runs those programs, they're aware that the intent is more than just to help people. Those programs were not designed to help people. Original program, like I said, the program Bluebird, Artichoke, and which became MKUltra, original intent was to see how you can impact people's behavior without their knowledge. One of the theories, and I don't know, Poseidon, what do you think about that? Fluoride often added to the water, drinking water in the cities specifically, to control people's behaviors as well. It calms people down, dumps them down, makes them not interested into things. Do you know anything about it? You don't buy it?
I don't buy it.
Why not?
Because I've been drinking water from the tap, filling up my Brita, and I'm still me.
Well, what does it mean? Like, do you know do you know the difference? That's the point. That's the point. You don't know how you would actually, if you look at the toothpaste, for example, and it has every toothpaste that has fluoride in it has a warning in it. Do not swallow if swallowed, like
in
contact
high
the
quantities.
poison. No, any amounts.
Really?
Any amounts. Yeah, read it. Like, don't take my word for it. Take my word. And they tell you rinse your mouth after you use it and all that stuff. And by itself, people that do add fluoride to the drinking water, and I think in Montreal we didn't, for a long time. I don't know if they still do or not, but you can check for that. I'm curious because I knew somebody who worked at the treatment plant. So is fluoride not in your opinion? I know you don't deal in opinions based on hypothesis and
Actually,
theory.
since 2011, Montreal does not use fluoride in the water.
Oh, great.
That's
So there's some good, maybe it's
Vancouver,
something.
Regina, Montreal, and Calgary. Toronto, they have fluoride in the water.
Oh yeah, don't go to Toronto. I always say
Explains
that.
a lot about their city.
Yeah, I agree.
And
Zombies,
you know what?
right?
You may be onto something.
I'm onto something, right? So you're going to look into it, do a podcast on that. So there is, and it's going back to what happened in the last 2-3 years. You know, I believe, I'm not even talking about vaccines. I'm talking about in the way people reacted, and the masses were controlled by hysteria and theory of the things like what's going to happen if I catch COVID. You know, like the way that all the news sources, the way that all the governments, and not just Canadian governments, all over the world, addressed the situation, and the way all of the governments of the world reacted, and how people reacted to what was going on, it felt very orchestrated, very organized. It wasn't something that happened by accident. Like they were prepared for it. So it makes me feel and believe that all those programs are developed in a way to see how people react. And now we have things like smart devices, you know, they call them smart, which also control and manipulate your opinion. People on social networks, which are, or search engines, which direct your attention to particular stories. I don't know if I can Google your story, I don't know if it'll come up first. Actually, Poseidon, I'm curious, if you Google Montreal MKUltra, how would you Google your case? How would you search your case online? Like to see if the public...
MKUltra, you can search it with MKUltra.
MKUltra Montreal, what shows up? I'm just curious.
The Canadian Encyclopedia, McGill pops up that there were experiments at McGill.
Yeah, the McGill University Health Centre.
But does the case itself pop up, like the case number?
It says declassified. Hold on. From 1957 to 1964, Project MKUltra, the CIA mind control project, used unconsenting patients to test the effects of sensory deprivation.
So that pops up, but not a current case, right? So the people cannot see. And I this is what I think, like the information is driven to, and now we have, what are they called? The fact checkers, you know, like, I'm sure.
Oh, I heard about this, the Allan Memorial Institute.
What? Specifically the case? We're talking, discussing now for past how many minutes?
No, I know. I just for some reason I saw images and it just clicked in my head.
Just see, that's MKUltra right there, man. Compartmentalization. He should be one of your clients. That's what he drank enough fluoride. He swallowed enough toothpaste that he can be part of your case. That's okay. All jokes aside, but the kids were suffering because the parents were specifically affected by the program.
That's right.
So
that's why I've sued in damages for the families.
What is
each family? I'm asking the total amount of damages I'm asking for each family, and there's one representative for each family, is $850,000 per family to compensate them for their loss, physical and emotional, as well as the agony and stress suffered due to defendants' faults. That is, the defendants are the Attorney General of Canada, Royal Victoria Hospital, McGill University Health Centre, plus the interest at the legal rate and the additional indemnity. And also, I'm asking them to the defendants to pay to the mandators, the ones who mandated Marilyn Rappaport and Alison Steele to represent them, for the sum of $150,000 as punitive and exemplary damages.
You think that? I don't think that's enough.
And also to declare the defendants liable for the costs of judicial and extrajudicial fees and disbursements, including fees for expertise included in the present matter for all the plaintiffs.
here's another, like, this is another issue, and correct me if I'm wrong. This is a moral issue I'm addressing. I mean, we are okay. So you're going to win the case. I have
Well,
no
I
doubt.
don't know if we're going to win the case.
I'm going
The
to say.
government have deep pockets, okay?
Well,
and,
that's the-
and
that-
unfortunately, Alison Steele and Malin Rappaport and my clients, the mandators who are representing 60 families, do not have deep pockets. And the government knows this, and they're doing everything they can to delay and force us to incur substantial legal costs instead of coming to the meeting with us and suggesting that we try and settle these cases.
What's the point? They don't really care about result. They don't pay out. And by the way, when you say government has deep pockets, aren't those pockets are ours?
Yeah, they're ours. That's right. But they're spending our money, not their money.
Not their money, exactly.
That's right.
And even if, okay, let's say you win and everybody gets $1 million and all that, it's still our money. But there are people who are liable for the actions. Even now, like, like the people that deny the fact that, Cameron was not acting. Originally, you said in your original lawsuit, the government denied any
That's right.
Involvement with the Cameron's case, and then later on they came out as it was. They financed it, so they lied.
No. Originally the government didn't deny that they had financed it when I sued when I sued for Gail Kastner. Okay, it took the action and damages. The government did not deny it, but they took the position that they're not responsible for the experimentation carried out by Dr. Cameron without informed consent because he was independent of the hospital. He was not employed by the hospital.
It reminds me of
He was not an employee of the
I
hospital.
was not an employee, so the independent contractors. It reminds me of the Wuhan story now when Dr. Fauci down south of the border says, hey, he had no knowledge of or any financing of the what do they call the anyway, that's when they're trying to make viruses and see if they can make a bioweapon out of it. Use a regular cold virus. And at first they all denied it. Gain of function. I feel not smart today. But gain of function research, they would deny it that they had any involvement. And now all this information came out that the NIH Institute and Dr. Fauci and all of those people were involved in the gain of function research. And more than that, they financed the Wuhan laboratories in China to do it, which, now saying that's possibly that the viruses were released from the biolab, specifically the Wuhan. Maybe other biolabs as well, but they seem to focus on that one. And it goes back into my original question, how can we trust the institutions that we constantly told to rely on? And like, oh, this is a accredited institution. By who? By government, And in this case, either government denies they were involved or they deny that they had responsibility in it. How can we trust the government with implementation of any of those processes if we know in the past they did such a wrong thing without any consideration for human life or any repercussion was going to happen, not only to the people who were experimented on, but also the kids and public in general? I don't have any trust is a result of the stories, as a result of those cases. And I'm super happy and I'm not happy about the case, but I'm glad people like you exist that not only go after the government, but also do things for the righteousness, right? You obviously, like you said, the people that you're representing, they don't have deep pockets. So what drives you? Like, my question is, like, what actually drives you? Like, it's not...
Well, I should tell you what drives me, okay? My late father, was, as I said, was a renowned litigation lawyer, and particularly because he was involved in probably the most important constitutional law case in the history of Canada, the case of Roncarelli versus Duplessis, where Roncarelli, who was a Jehovah's Witness, put up bail for the Jehovah's Witnesses when Duplessis was premier of the province of Quebec. And Duplessis was a strong Catholic, Roman Catholic, who was totally against the Jehovah's Witnesses when they would go door to door and distribute their pamphlets or knock on the door of houses and distribute their pamphlets attacking the Catholic Church. And bylaws were passed by Montreal saying that they had no right to go door to door or stand on the corner distributing pamphlets. And if they did that, they were arrested. And Roncarelli, who was a very successful restaurateur, it was called Roncarelli's, and it was an Italian restaurant on Crescent Street, would put up bail for these Jehovah's Witnesses. So what happened was Duplessis, as premier of the province, gave an order to the chairman of the Liquor Commission to cancel Roncarelli's license and go ahead and seize all his liquor and his food and so on at the restaurant and close up his restaurant, which they did, okay? So Roncarelli engaged my father to sue Duplessis personally as premier of the province. And my father engaged F.R. Scott, who was my constitutional law professor when I was at McGill University, very well known. And he acted with my father in this case. They were successful in winning the case before the trial judge, and Roncarelli was awarded damages against Duplessis, the premier of the province. Duplessis went to appeal. He won in the Court of Appeal, and his lawyer at the time was Tremblay, who became Chief Justice of the Quebec Court of Appeal. He won, and the action was dismissed. My father and Scott appealed to the Supreme Court of Canada, and they won the case with six judges in favor. Not only did they maintain the action against Duplessis as premier, but they increased the damages to over $30,000 at the time against Duplessis. And what this case established was that no one, including the premier of a province or the prime minister of this country, is above the law. And that's what gave me the motivation at the time. I was in law school at the time that my father won this case 6-3 against the premier of the province.
It's the first time I hear about this case.
I'm surprised. We'll read the case. Roncarelli versus Duplessis. It's probably the most, by many of the judges, including John Laskin, whose father was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada and who was a retired judge now of the Court of Appeal. In his opinion, it's the most important constitutional law case in the history of Canada.
So I'm going to ask you...
Roncarelli versus Duplessis.
I'm going to look into it. So now...
You definitely should look into it.
I'm going to ask you a constitutional question now. So if that's a precedent, so how does it work if it was being sued here? Okay, so this is just pre-question. Was it according to the Civil Code or Commonwealth? Because this is a bit confusing.
According to the Civil Code.
Civil Code.
Duplessis was held responsible. And at that time, he had a right to appeal to the Privy Council of United Kingdom. You don't have that right anymore. But he had a right to do it, and he said, no, I'm not, because he knew he would lose. Okay? So he says, I'm not going to appeal. I'll leave to the people in Quebec, to the citizens of Quebec, to decide whether I was right or was Roncarelli right. And I don't have to tell you, shortly thereafter, his government was defeated. And the Liberals were back in power. The Union Nationale was defeated.
So actually, it seems to me it's very similar to what happened, at least procedurally, what happened recently in a trucker convoy in Ottawa, where government also feels like they overstep some of the civil laws. And
that's where I think that many of I think there are actions that are pending against the government, and I think they're relying on the Roncarelli versus Duplessis case.
That was my question. Yeah. So because this case had a precedent before, now it can be used in the Commonwealth Court as well, because there's a precedent.
Right across Canada can be used, because it's a Supreme Court judgment.
Okay, this is
applies to all of Canada.
This is an IQ subject here for the legal question. So in Canada we have, and this is interesting, I don't know, Poseidon, I don't know if you're aware of this, in Canada we have two legal systems, Civil Code and Commonwealth.
That's right. So common law.
Not Commonwealth, sorry, common law. We have common law. So Civil Code comes from Neapolitanic law, right, from the old France, and common law, it's, we take it from Quinn. The specific Civil Code is based on law itself, where common law can also have be based on the precedent on existing
Right.
cases, and Roe versus Wade is kind of example of things like that. So now, because that happened, it can be Trudeau's government can be sued in a civil court because, according to the code itself, and the common law because there's a precedent for it.
I should tell you another story, which is interesting.
Tell me.
After the judgment came down, and I was in first year law school at the time, and as I said, F.R. Scott, who acted with my father, was my constitutional law professor. F.R. Scott had a party at his house, okay? And my parents invited me, being a law student, to go to the party. And who was one of the people who was present at that party then? Was Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who was a good friend of F.R. Scott, and who was a constitutional law professor at the time at the University of Montreal. He was not even a member of parliament yet.
No, he wasn't.
And I'll never forget, many years later, when Trudeau was still alive and retired from politics, I met him with his sons at the time, at a Japanese restaurant on Mountain Street, I believe it was, because he loved to go for Japanese food. And he was sitting there with his three sons, one of whom was Justin Trudeau, our present prime minister. And I went up to him. I was with my wife and my son. I introduced myself, and I said to him, I'm the son of Albert Louis Stein, who is a lawyer for Ron Corelli, whom you certainly know because he was a good friend of F.R. Scott, and he was at the party at the time whereby they were celebrating the victory before the Supreme Court against Duplessis. And Justin, I'm sure, would remember that too, that I went
So Justin Trudeau, okay, so correct me if I'm wrong. So the Pierre Trudeau, the father, he was he was on the side of the victors. Okay, so
he supported Ron Corelli. Oh yes, he felt that Duplessis was above the law. He acted above the law, and he was and Ron Corelli, he was very happy to learn when the Supreme Court judgment came down that Ron Corelli won.
So Justin should remember this case specifically.
Oh, he'll certainly remember the case.
So why does he have such big kahunas, such big boasts over stuff?
I don't know who's advised him.
Who's advised them? So is Justin a victim of MKUltra?
No, I don't think he's a victim of MK.
Oh, then he's a perpetrator because, things that we do under duress here, like you cannot work unless you have this, you cannot travel unless you have this. It seems like. To me, it's also considered to be torture in some way, and a lot of our rights are being violated. And
well, the court will decide that.
But the court will decide.
But the circumstances in regard to the convoy are very different from the Ron Corelli case. I mean, you can't say they're the same type of case. There, Trudeau justified his position and his government's position in regard to that convoy on the basis that it was interfering with businesses and other citizens of Canada who had a right to walk the streets and so on. And this was a busy part of Ottawa. And the convoy had no justification to prevent access to the streets for cars and pedestrians.
They use false information. But they use what you said is their position. But now that evidence came out that businesses did so well when it happened, because all those people were around that they had to feed and clothes and all that stuff.
I don't know anything about that.
No, that's what I'm saying.
That would be a question of proof.
It's a question of proof, yeah. But also they lied about the fact, like when they put in emergency powers, that also already came out as an evident thing that they lied that the Ottawa police requested it, and RCMP requested the emergency powers, which they didn't.
Well, during the FLQ crisis here in Quebec, Pierre Elliott Trudeau was our prime minister, and he put in emergency powers at the time. Okay, so I think that's where Justin got the idea about putting in the emergency powers here in regard to the convoy in Ottawa that took place recently.
Yeah, well, we'll let the audience
look
help
into
us.
that,
Yeah,
yeah.
we're gonna post the show and
Yeah.
listen. If you have any ideas on how we can
Okay.
help Metro Alan
It would be
Stein,
very much appreciated.
yeah, to achieve and beating the government. Actually, I'm so more about exposing and for the truth to come out. It's not really like because again, you win and people get the money, but first of all, money does not resolve all the pain and hurt that people experience. It's just it's you cannot financially justify the torture that they experience throughout the lifetime, and continue to experience it in terms of the kids, because no doubt it affected them perpetually.
Well, as you know, I don't know if you know, when Allison John Steele and Marilyn Rappaport, who are the mandataries in this case, who are my clients, mandated me to sue, they had a meeting, okay, at Marilyn Rappaport's condominium with many of the former many of the families of former patients of Dr. Cameron in regard to instituting proceedings against the government and asking the government for an apology, which they did do, okay, but the government never came forth with an apology in regard to the
In your legal
implication of the Attorney General of Canada in funding these experiments.
In your legal opinion, if they would apologize, that means they would also bear responsibility in a way where they can be criminally held responsible?
I don't know if they could be criminally held responsible, but they could be. It would be a good reason to.
Was Dr. Cameron criminally held?
No, he was never criminally held.
Is
And he
anyone?
died
Was
shortly
anyone?
thereafter. He died after he left the Allan Memorial. He resigned from the Allan Memorial, moved to the United States, and died shortly thereafter.
How
in
old
the
was he?
60s. I don't remember his age, but he died shortly after 1965
CIA?
in Vermont.
Can you look up how old
What was
was
his
he?
name again? Sorry.
Dr. Ewen Cameron, Ewen Cameron. He died in the United States.
Oh, so suicided. That's before
Age
Hillary's time.
65, 1967, died. Let's take a
There it
look and
is. There's
see.
your answer. See?
Early life and career. Death. There you go. Okay. Cameron died of a heart attack while hiking with his son in the Adirondacks
See?
Mountains.
There's-
Yeah, it's just
exactly.
across
On
the
September
border.
8th,
Yeah, so it's in New York, not Vermont.
Does it say
Okay, New
how
York.
does it say how old was he?
Yeah, it was
65.
He was very
65.
young,
I mean,
65 years
65.
old.
I mean, it's possible you get the heart attack, but people were a lot healthier back then. Like
Maybe they didn't just want to give him. They just didn't want to give him retirement funds.
that's what.
Maybe it's as simple as
that's
that.
that's one of the theories why all those elderlies died in the retirement homes the past 2 years.
Oh, why? Here?
because they used Dr. Cameron, who they did this testing and experimentation in Montreal because he was a director. He was a renowned psychiatrist, Dr.
Okay.
Cameron. He had a reputation, a very good reputation all over the world.
Okay.
And and he was prepared to carry out these experiments because he was funded by the CIA and the Canadian government.
It sort of kind of answered my question actually just now.
That's why they carried it out, these experiments,
Yeah.
at MKUltra at the Allan Memorial, where Dr. Cameron was the director.
So accredited institution oftentimes will position itself as like, yeah, look, you should give me the funding because, I'm an accredited institution. I have experience and I have a name. And stories like this, tell you, be wary of people like this. That's why, when people say, well, Dr. Fauci is evil because, he's doing all this crazy stuff, like stories like this makes people think maybe it is true. Maybe he's doing it for whatever other intent. And it could be financial. It doesn't have to be like, oh, I want to hurt people intentionally, but it could be a financial interest, in who knows, maybe in Dr. Cameron's case, that was a financial interest. But you isn't a medical professional. You should have a strong moral code. You do the Hippocratic oath. You take a Hippocratic oath as a professional in that case.
But what if he thought he was helping?
Well, that's what he was saying. That's what he was saying. But good road
He
paved with
thought
good
he
and
was
taste.
helping.
I don't believe that. I don't believe if you're torturing people, how does it happen? People experiencing pain. You can see that. People that run those industries and tests, they have moral responsibility, more so than anybody else. They have fiduciary duty, the legal term. They have fiduciary duty to see when they're crossing the line. They should say, no, we got to stop experimenting. It's really affecting people. Thus, your lawsuit. You're suing them because they didn't stop. They sued they experimented on hundreds and hundreds of people,
Oh, yeah.
which was already self-evident that they were hurting people,
Yeah.
and results were there. You're not suing them because they didn't know they didn't know that they were hurting, but you're suing them specifically because they hurt people, and damages are clear. Damages are clear. Do you have anything else?
No, I think we've covered everything.
We've covered
And if
anything.
you need any more information, I could always send it to you. Okay, so because I have to get back to my
Yeah,
office.
we're going to list the case. We're going to list the case at the bottom of the podcast.
Yeah.
Any last questions, Poseidon, before we got to go?
No. I'm going to continue listening to the book Chaos. It talks about MKUltra.
Yeah, and don't drink fluoride. Well, we'll post some links there if you're interested in MKUltra. Thank you, Metro Alan Stein. It was a very...
Do you have a fax
interesting show.
machine? If you want, you can.
Oh, I don't
No.
know. But Poseidon, what was the last time you saw? Do you even know what water fax? You never even seen fax.
I know what it is.
No,
but
I mean a copy machine.
we don't, unfortunately.
We don't have
Okay,
copy
okay,
machine.
okay.
But if it's a public case, we can pull it up.
Yeah, you can pull. I gave you the number.
Yeah,
So you can go online. You'll get a copy of it.
I'll
Take the number again.
Yeah, I'll take the number and the stamp.
And that tells you the whole story, and you should have that in front of you. Okay.
Thank you, Alan Stein. It was a good show.
Okay.
Thank you, Poseidon.
see.
No problem.
All right.
Okay.
See you later. Ciao.